Scholars have long recognized a basic structural relationship in the logic of religious sacrifice, that of do ut des, Latin for I give such that you may give. Here there is a reciprocal exchange between divine and human parties, such that by the ritual destruction of an object, the gods or spirits may provide, often in an abundant form, some version of that which was sacrificed. Such sacrifices can take the form of the complete destruction of an object, such as the Israelite practice of korban, which simultaneously destroys the sacrifice, but also literally draws near the divine. The same root of karav means to come close to. Or something like food sacrifices, which literally feed the gods, providing them sustenance, which, in turn, is rewarded through ensured agricultural productivity. Of course, the object of sacrifice is typically a precious commodity of some kind, and even the person making such an offering must often undergo some purification to even hazard the offering. Indeed, my favorite analysis of sacrifice and mysticism is that of the French philosopher Georges Bataille, who has argued that sacrifice is nothing other than the production of the sacred itself. Of the many religious cultures that I've studied over the years, none more powerfully combines asceticism, mysticism, and sacrifice as the classical Maya. For the Maya, their blood was the very mortar of creation, and by joining the gods in profound acts of ritual bloodletting, could the Maya elite mystically commune with the spirit world of their ancestors, ensure the continued agricultural success of their lands, mark important astrological, temporal, and political transitions as described in their famously rich calendrical systems, and even conjure into being the gods themselves. Such mystical bloodletting was central to the life of the Maya religious and political elite, and by exploring this rather extreme form of piety, to us at least, can we gain a greater grasp of this amazing civilization's spiritual culture, but also an insight into the mystical practice at the very limits of agony and ecstasy. In fact, this imagery has made such an impression upon me over the years that the very icon for the channel, this channel, is derived from a Mayan glyph, Tzak, meaning to conjure a mystical vision, typically through ritual bloodletting. So if you've ever wondered about the channel's icon, I'll be discussing it as well in this episode. Further, if you're just interested in mysticism, magic, or the academic study of the occult, make sure to subscribe and check out my other content on topics in esotericism. And also, if you want to support my work of providing accessible, scholarly, and free content on topics in esotericism here on YouTube, I'd hope you consider supporting my work on Patreon, or perhaps with a one-time donation. You can find those links below, and I really appreciate you considering to support this channel and this project. Also, as a content warning, this episode will contain descriptions and depictions of ritual self-harm as evidenced from historical sources, artifacts, and sculptures. Now, let's turn to the mystical bloodletting practices of the classical Maya, a people who built one of the most majestic civilizations in world history, and who heroically survived to this day despite colonial attempts to erase their amazing culture. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. First and foremost, I want to make it clear that I'm not a Mayanist, and so I'm working a little bit out of my wheelhouse in this episode, but I've researched this topic for quite some time, and I think I can present it without too many errors. Of course, for the Mayanists out there, or especially indigenous Mayan people, please leave any critiques in the comments below. I really appreciate your insight, especially if I get things not quite right or just wrong. Blood sacrifice, either animal or human sacrifice, is an unsurprisingly ubiquitous aspect of much of world religion until pretty recently. Of course, that such a practice is now seen as shocking or even barbaric mostly informs us about our values and mores, and it's only by studying the sacrificial systems of various religious cultures on their own terms with their own values that we can move past these rather parochial attitudes, even if we still reject the validity of blood sacrifice. What perhaps makes the blood sacrificial system of the classical Maya civilization especially interesting is just whose blood was the most treasured. In this case, that blood is culled from the ritual and political elite in the form of auto-sacrifice, which is just to say that the most powerful expression of this ritual bloodletting was done by the ritual and political elite to themselves. They sacrificed their own blood through ritual mutilation. Of course, many religions engage in asceticism or even ritual self-harm, but no religious culture that I know of so centralized that practice in such an extreme form as the Maya. Though I am thinking of producing episodes in a series exploring mystical self-harm from the everyday flesh mortification of the Catholic practice of wearing the cilice to more extreme spiritual athleticism of, Buddhist self-mummification in Japan. So, stay tuned for that cheery topic. To grasp the centrality of this practice, one must turn to one of the Maya creation myths found in the Popol Vuh, a sacred text especially of the K'iche' people, but probably instructive of the larger religious mythology of the region. There the gods had created the world, but wished to be recognized for having done so. Creating animals, they found that such beings were incapable of such recognition, only making seemingly random sounds when the gods spoke to them. Following several failed attempts to create people, the gods landed on using maize for flesh and water for blood, and they created human beings who could recognize and praise them. But in turn, bloodletting became the central mechanism of that recognition, simultaneously providing the gods with sustenance recognition, ensuring agricultural success, and mystically linking the human world with the spirit world or the world of the divine more generally. Blood, especially royal and priestly blood, was the substance which bound the world together, and ritual blood sacrificed ensured the continuity of the cosmos itself, from the divine world to the very growth of the maize that human beings depended upon for food. This is all clear from the central and copious depictions of ritual bloodletting in Maya art and artifacts, but also colonial accounts of the practice. While the ritual practice did, of course, evolve over time and location, depictions of the act remain surprisingly constant. It seems that the central act was performed by members of the Maya elite, in which they would pierce their earlobes, tongues, and especially the foreskin of the penis, whereby bark paper or strings or barbed rope, sometimes depicted as bearing stingray spines to ensure further laceration, would be pulled through the wound. The blood itself would be allowed to drip onto a brazier filled with bark paper, which would then be set alight, such that within the smoke rising out of the blood-soaked paper, a vision of the Vision Serpent out of which the divine and spiritual world could be glimpsed. Indeed, the Maya glyphs for blood and smoke are often indistinguishable. Such bloodletting rituals were also to have been accompanied with ritual fasting, singing, ecstatic dance, and the use of other intoxicating drugs, especially alcohol and nicotine in both oral and enema form. Typically, the bodily piercing was performed with stingray spines or with ceremonial lancets made from precious stones such as jade, obsidian glass, which is actually sharper than a razor blade, or even elaborately carved bones. In fact, sometimes even human bones, perhaps bones of previous sacrificial victims. The image of the sacred lancet with its 3 knots has become something of a quasi-divine entity representing the awesome power of self-sacrifice. Mayanists actually refer to this image of the divine lancet as the perforator god. Even the ceremonial garb of those engaged in ritual bloodletting was carefully prescribed. Royals would be garbed in a curious mix of elaborate jaguar pelts and other indicators of high status, while at the same time their hair would be done up as to indicate their status as a captive or a renunciate, and around their necks they would in fact wear the roped collar of one captured in battle. To better understand this ritual, let's explore perhaps the most famous depictions of ritual bloodletting from the Maya world, Lentils 24 and 25, found at Yaxchilan in what is now Chiapas, Mexico. Lentil 24, the first in a series, depicts Shield Jaguar standing over his wife, Lady Shok, bearing an enormous torch, indicating that the ritual was performed either at night or perhaps within the sacred inner confines of a royal building or a temple structure. Lady Shok is kneeling over the brazier which bears the bark paper, and she's pulling a stingray barbed rope through her perforated tongue with the blood scrolls covering her cheeks. Her face is splattered with blood. Their dress also indicates that Shield Jaguar is also going to let his blood on this occasion, probably from his penis, and there would be further sacrifices made as well, probably of captured prisoners. In fact, Shield Jaguar is wearing the shrunken head of a former sacrifice on his very elaborate headdress. The inscriptions themselves provide the date of October 28th, 709 of the Common Era, in our calendar at least, the figures that are named, and even that Shield Jaguar himself had lived into his 4th Ka'atun, or that he was between the ages of 60 and 80 years old at the time in which this ritual was done, along with his titles, the Captor of Ahawaha and the Blood Lord of Yaxchilan. Lady Shok is also named with her titles in the lower left-hand corner, along with the indicator of the action at play here, bloodletting, with the lancet glyph very clearly visible. Indeed, Lady Shok was one of the most politically powerful women in the entire history of the Maya world, and it's unsurprising that we should find her depicted in such an absolutely majestic fashion. However, it's Lentil 25 that's truly stunning. Dated on the anniversary of Shield Jaguar's accession date, October 23rd, 681 of the Common Era, and written in mirror image as if to be viewed through the stone from the outside, we find Lady Shok gazing upward in ecstatic awe. Lady Mays, as she's alternatively called, kneels down holding braziers in both hands filled with blood-soaked bark paper and lancets, with the Vision Serpent rising up with the smoke of another nearby brazier. One is positively daunted at the amount of potential blood loss involved or the physical endurance required for such sustained bodily mutilations. Indeed, the Maya had numerous glyphs for especially scarred penises, denoting years of bloodletting rituals and the subsequent buildup of scar tissue, especially on the foreskin. Rising up with the smoke is the Vision Serpent, and emerging from its gaping maw is the vision, perhaps of an ancestor spirit, clearly wearing all the trappings of an elite warrior, brandishing a shield and spear. Just how the combination of agony, ecstasy, jouissance from the mutilation, blood loss, fasting, intoxication, dancing, and other ritual performances produce these mystical visions is unclear, but it seems that such profound visionary experiences should be viewed as simply expected here at the limit of human consciousness and experience. Another Lentil series from Yaxchilan depicts Shield Jaguar's son, Bird Jaguar, and several of his wives and consorts also engaged in mystical bloodletting a generation later. Lentil 17 depicts Lady Balam Ish on the left here pulling a non-barbed rope through her tongue with the brazier again collecting her blood, while Bird Jaguar sits with his legs spread apart and a bone awl, indicating that he is also engaging in bloodletting from his penis. Curiously enough, this lentil was erected on February the 18th, 752 of the Common Era to commemorate the birth of Bird Jaguar's son and heir, but Lady Balam Ish is not the mother of that child. On what appears to be a sequel lentil to this one, the story becomes even more confusing. Lentil 15 depicts another of Bird Jaguar's wives or consorts, Lady Six Tun, a reference to the Mayan calendar, and also probably a political marriage from outside of Yaxchilan. She too conjures a mystical vision here from the blood smoke, with a more naturalistic Vision Serpent rising, perhaps an ancestor spirit again emerging from its mouth. The inscription describing the scene denotes that the royal woman and her titles, along with a couplet describing the bloodletting as having occurred on the 28th of March, 755 CE, 3 years after the accession of Bird Jaguar. To evidence just how stable this imagery was, one can consult a stele depicting Ba'aktu'ul letting blood and conjuring the Vision Serpent in preparation for his accession to the throne. This stele is dated to October 9th, 199 of the Common Era, hundreds of years before the lentils at Yaxchilan, and yet note the important continuity of symbolism, with the Vision Serpent rising before Ba'aktu'ul, its mouth agape with the ancestor or divine figure emergent. We learn from the inscription that 52 days after this ritual was performed, Ba'aktu'ul ascended to his throne. This also gives us important information about the roles performed by such ritual, mystical bloodletting. The first is clearly a semi-regular ritual in which royal blood was let to indicate important moments of time. For instance, on important moments during the precession of the complex Mayan calendar or various astrological events, especially periods in the transit of Venus, but also for preparing such important political events as an impending war, the birth of heirs, and accessions to the throne, as we've just seen. Lentil 2 from La Pasadita depicts Bird Jaguar scattering blood from his mutilated penis in celebration of a passing of a 10-ton period, that is to say half a ka'atun before a local governor or kahal. The 3 knots of the perforator god can be seen dangling from his phallus, with the blood pellets being poured out into a ritual jar. At Stela 25 at Dos Pilas, we also learn a very fascinating purpose of this ritual bloodletting: divine evocation. There, on December 5th, 711 of the Common Era, shield god K let his blood to celebrate the end of a ka'atun, or a period of the Mayan calendar equivalent to 7,200 days in our calendar. Specifically, we learned that shield god K, through the scattering blood ritual, gave birth to the twin paddler gods. The paddler gods are typically associated with cycle-ending events, which makes sense here with them appearing during the scattering ritual marking the end of this ka'atun. Though what's really fascinating is that it seems that the very blood sacrifice seems to have conjured them or summoned them, or quite literally given birth to the twin paddler gods, as the inscription indicates. The profusion of art and artifacts, including lancets buried with the dead, figurines engaged in sacrifice, numerous vessels for capturing sacrificial blood, numerous commemorative steles, to the sublime lentils of Yaxchilan depicting the act, one seems right in concluding that mystical bloodletting formed perhaps the central ritual role of classical Maya society, at least at the level of the elite. By appreciating this ritual, we gain a deeper understanding of this glorious civilization. Now, I mentioned that my interest in Maya language actually led me to the icon for esoterica. Well, I was planning to visit the region and was in the process of learning to read the Maya hieroglyphs and language, and as I was working through the process, I came upon and learned the glyph Tzak, literally a hand grasping a fish, simultaneously meaning to conjure a vision, very often in the context of the bloodletting rituals which summon the Vision Serpent. In fact, they're often the same word. This glyph struck me as exceptionally beautiful because the image of the hand grasping the fish is a wonderful image for the evanescent nature of a mystical experience or mystical vision. The fish slips through the hand just as the vision and the blood smoke is dissipating just as quickly as it rises out of the brazier. This Tzak glyph captures what I find to be perhaps one of the most interesting aspects of the esoteric dimension of religion and philosophy. That as quickly as one grasps it, it's always slipping away. And I can think of no more beautiful symbolic expression of this notion than the Maya Tzak glyph. Hence the glyph becoming the icon for the channel more generally, born out of my amazement of such a beautiful linguistic sign, but also out of respect for the extreme spiritual athleticism taken on by the Maya religious culture of the classical world. Again, if you've read some George Bataille, especially his theory of religion, you'll better understand my somewhat devious delight in this complex symbol and practice. Despite the common discourse of the collapse and end of Maya civilization and the actual attempts by colonizers to destroy their civilization, the Maya people are alive and well, with the Quiche Mayan language being spoken by over 1 million people. If you're interested in learning to read some of the classical hieroglyphic script and language, I had a really great time working through the Koe and Stone text, which is really engaging and pretty intuitive considering that this is an incredibly difficult and complex language and script. Of course, having the Montgomery dictionary nearby is also really helpful as you begin to decipher some of these steles. Perhaps the best introductory level study of the Mayan bloodletting mysticism that I discussed in this episode can be found in the lusciously illustrated The Blood of Kings, Dynasty in Ritual and Maya Art, which can be had for a fantastic price if you get it used, even in hardback. Gronemeyer has also published a fascinating analysis of the anatomical and physiological concerns at work in the actual acts of ritual mutilations themselves. In fact, they pretty conclusively show that blood loss alone is probably not responsible for the mystical appearance of the Vision Serpent in these bloodletting rituals. The Koe and Houston text on the Maya still serves as the best introduction in English to this amazing civilization, and the Tedlock edition of the Popol Vuh I think remains the standard English translation, but really coolly, a back-translated version into Maya hieroglyphics in the Quiche language, which was the language that the Popol Vuh was written in originally, has been produced as well. But I have to admit, I don't have anywhere in the neighborhood of the linguistic ability to check the translation, but it's so exciting to see Maya language being again written in the indigenous script of that region, the Maya hieroglyphics. It's just fascinating to see a text in that script again. I have to say that I look forward to someday visiting the region to see Copan and Palenque and Tikal and experiencing the awe of what was, and also the everyday heroism of a people surviving and thriving to this very day. Until next time, thank you for watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.